The teacher would have us to pull out a sheet of paper. We would write our names on it. But before the test would actually begin, she would have us pull out of our desks other non-spelling book books. Not your spelling book. You got to leave that in your desk. But other books, so maybe a reading book, a math book, a history book, and you would open them, but then you would stack them around the edges of your desk. So you would not completely open, but open enough so that it could still stand, so that you built like a little fort around the corners of your desk. You've got this perimeter. And we always enjoy that because as you look throughout the class, it looks like this series of forts that the kids have constructed. And we kind of enjoyed that as students, but the teacher did this not simply so that we would have a construction project that we would enjoy, but because there was a primary goal in mind. The goal was very simple. She didn't want us to be able to see anybody else's paper, and she didn't want anybody else to be able to see ours. We put all these books up to prevent cheating. You recognize that there are all sorts of reasons that marriages today experience trials and difficulties, and many of which wind up encountering and then ending in divorce. And consistently throughout the course of history, one of the reasons that has motivated that has been, quite frankly, cheating. It's been adultery. Wouldn't it be nice if there was some way that you could put some hedge up, some fort around your marriage, around your relationship, so that would never happen to you? Now, the bad news is this. There's not enough books that you can put up around you that's going to prevent infidelity. But I do have some good news. From a book, from God's Word, I believe that God has given to us the counsel that we need, the information that's necessary if we want to effectively affair-proof our marriages. So how is it that that's possible? Look with me in your Bibles today to Genesis chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39, and we're going to begin reading today with verse 6 as we're continuing to walk our way through this series on the life of Joseph. Genesis 39, starting with verse 6. Now we're picking up a bit midstream here, but we'll get some context here in a moment. It's going to make some sense. Genesis 39, starting with verse 6. There we're told, "Thus Potiphar left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And Potiphar did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that Potiphar's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said to him, 'Lie with me.' But Joseph refused and said to his master's wife, 'Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he's committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?' So it was as he spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, she caught him by his garment, saying, 'Lie with me.' But he left his garment in her hand, and he fled and ran outside." Here in this episode in the life of Joseph, as God has recorded this incident for us, I really believe it gives for us all the information, all the instruction that we need, that if we'll pay attention to, we can effectively, as followers of God, affair-proof our marriages. But what is it going to take? Well, first of all, based on what we see, I believe it's going to take both spouses being attentive to the relationship. Both spouses they need to be attentive to the relationship. Now, before going any further, it'd be very easy for some of you to effectively check out mentally at this point and say, well, Michael's talking about marriage and infidelity, and that has really nothing to do with me. And some of you may say that because you're single. Well, that may be true now, but you may not remain single. And so if you want in a future relationship to guard against this, then this has application for you. Others of you would say, well, I'm married. I've been married for a long time, or my marriage is so healthy, my marriage is so strong, I don't have to worry about this. This is not going to happen to me. If that is your thought, let me just share with you a little bit of information. The Associated Press released or publicized a survey that was conducted this past year by the Marital and Family Therapy Group. And those statistics said that 22% of men and 14% of women admitted to having had at least one affair. The Janus report issued numbers that were even higher, saying that 1/3 of men and fully 1/4 of women had admitted to having at least one extramarital affair. Keep in mind, these are of scientifically conducted surveys where people actually admitted this. So you got to think there are a good number of others that simply did not admit it. What I'm saying to you is that this is a real problem. It's a real problem not simply in American society and culture, but it's a people problem. It has always been this way. And one of the perennial threats to any marriage is the threat of adultery. It's the threat of infidelity. So how is it that as followers of Christ we can do our level best to ensure that doesn't happen to us, that it doesn't happen to me, and it doesn't happen to you in your relationship? Well, I believe we get that here. So consider at this point what's going on in Joseph's life. When last we left him, he is serving as a slave, for a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was a captain of the Pharaoh's guard, effectively the security detail for the Pharaoh. He's got a position of prominence, a position of power. It also seems that he's got a position that yields for him a considerable salary. He's got what appears to be an expansive estate where he's got numerous, perhaps even scores of slaves to be able to manage all of his affairs. And you remember one of the things that we talked about last week is that Joseph was a man, relative to his walk with God, that he demonstrated consistently faithfulness to God. Because of that, it affected every aspect of his life. It affected the type of man that he was, the type of worker and employee that he was, the type of conversations that he had with others. It affected every aspect of his life. Because of this, he demonstrated to Potiphar, hey, I'm a guy that can be absolutely trusted. I am implicitly worthy of trust. Because of that, you recall what Potiphar did. He promotes Joseph to effectively become his chief of staff, so that everyone in the house, with the exception of Potiphar and his wife, everyone answers to Joseph. Everything passes and crosses his desk. He's responsible for all of the details. Well, in verse 6, we are given some information about Joseph. We're told that Potiphar left all that he had in Joseph's hands. So again, all the affairs of the house, the home, it's all entrusted into Joseph, so much so that Potiphar did not even know what he had except for the bread that he ate. So we're told about the scope of his influence, but then we're told an additional fact about Joseph there in verse 6, that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. So in terms of form, that's speaking of the physical shape that he was in. Joseph was in good shape. And in terms of how he looked, Joseph was a handsome man. And so he's very much something to look at. And I must say, the weight of that, the yoke of that, is a tremendous burden. And I can empathize with Joseph, what it was like to have to go through this. But Joseph, he's the chief of staff. He's a man that is handsome. He's in good shape. He is something to look at. And we're told in verse 7 that it came to pass after this that Potiphar's wife, and I wish that she were named, but all we know is that she's Potiphar's wife. It says that she cast longing eyes on Joseph. Now, this says to us, and it doesn't give us all the detail, but we can imagine the first day that Joseph showed up as the new slave at Potiphar's estate, his wife probably just in a passing way just noted, hey, there's a new guy. He's pretty good looking. You know, I guess if we're going to have somebody here, it's all the better that they're handsome, and Joseph is. But as time passes, what perhaps started as a passing glance and a notice of his attractiveness, it becomes more of a longing gaze. And she would look at Joseph and begin to entertain in her mind thoughts that she shouldn't have been entertaining, beginning to fantasize in her mind, thinking about, now what if Potiphar wasn't in the picture? Now what would it be like to embrace him? What would it be like to be touched by him? What would it be like to show him affection? And in her mind, she's beginning to create this drama, this soap opera involving Joseph. And so what started as an initial attraction or a notice of his attractiveness, it passes on and it continues to advance. She doesn't stop this, and finally she gets to the point at the end of verse 7 where she is ready to act. It says that she came to Joseph and she said, "Lie with me." And she did not mean, let's not tell the truth. Right? How did it get to this point? Well, I want you to understand that the easiest thing that we can do is to look at all the characters. You've got Joseph, you've got Potiphar, and you've got his wife. We say out of the gate that Joseph is innocent, and we've got to say that Potiphar's wife is guilty. She really is guilty. She's the aggressor in all of this. She's the one that is acting on these impulses and on these desires. And I don't mean whatsoever to minimize her culpability or in any way diminish the fact she is absolutely across the line and acting completely in godless ways. I don't want to minimize that. Joseph's innocent, and perhaps we could easily say, or in a passing way, say, well, Potiphar's pretty innocent in this as well. But I would suggest to you that I really believe that Potiphar genuinely shares some guilt in all of this. He's got a role in this. And you say, well, what exactly is that? Notice again what we're told in verse 6. That Potiphar left all that he had in Joseph's hands, so that he did not know what he had except for the bread that he ate. So think about this. Everything in Potiphar's life that's not work-related, Joseph handles. Finances, that's Joseph's territory. Maintenance of the home and of the estate and of the fields, of the animals, all that, Joseph takes care of that. Making sure that there's food on the table, that meals are cooked. Well, Joseph ensures that that takes place. We're not told whether or not Potiphar and his wife had children, but we can reasonably assume that they did. So who's going to ensure that they are taught, that they are disciplined, that they are restrained? Well, Joseph's going to take care of that. Everything apart from the meal that was set before Potiphar, Joseph knew all the details. Potiphar had no idea. Here's the question. How involved was Potiphar in his own home? How involved, how knowledgeable was he of the life and the goings-on within his own family? In all likelihood, it seems that he wasn't at all. And apart from coming home and having an evening meal and sleeping there, Potiphar seems to be a guy that in all likelihood was consumed with his work. He had a good job. He had considerable influence. It earned for his family a perhaps luxurious living. And he was concerned with all the affairs related to Pharaoh, but related to what was going on in his own home, it seems that Potiphar doesn't have any idea. As a result, I think we can logically begin to deduce that Potiphar was effectively absent within the life and the goings-on of the home. In all likelihood, he did not show his wife the love and the attention that she needed. If Potiphar would have demonstrated interest in her life, had he demonstrated and been an active participant in the goings-on of the home, if he had communicated to his wife that she was a woman that was loved and valued and appreciated and wanted and all of those things, do you think she would have been seeking to seduce Joseph? I really don't think so. Understand me in this. To me, it makes little difference whether you plan to get married, whether you have been married 50 minutes or you've been married in excess of 50 years. If you want to ensure the fidelity of your relationship or a relationship that will occur, if you want to safeguard it against infidelity, it is going to require not simply one, but both spouses being actively attentive to the relationship. Husbands and wives both have needs to be affirmed, and they both need to find that in the other. Both of them need to feel loved and wanted. They both need to feel appreciated and valued. And understand this, these are needs that do not go away. And if the needs are not found within the home, you know what? They'll find them somewhere else. As I alluded to earlier, we just moved this past week to a new house, and in the backyard there's a number of trees, but there's 4 pine trees in particular that I've got my eye on. 3 of them are within proximity of the house. If something were to happen, they may be able to hit part of the house. One of them is particularly weighted back towards the house, and I don't like pine trees to begin with, and one of the primary reasons is because in time, consistently, they snap, they fall, they're just not very strong trees. And so I'm aware at some point it's going to be an ice storm, it's going to be wind, something is going to bring those trees down. And if that happens, it may damage something, destroy something that I don't want it to damage or destroy. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get those trees down. At some point here in the near future, I'm going to get those trees down. You know why? Because a pine tree that's not there can't hit your house. If it's not there, it cannot hit your house. And what we have got to do is to make sure that there are within our relationship, within your relationship, within your marriage, you've got to make sure that you safeguard it, that you protect it against infidelity so that if there are needs, they're going to be found in the family. And so that if there are threats that are out there, that you actively and intentionally remove them. I actually got ahead of myself. I told the wrong story. So I want you to forget about the pine tree thing and let me tell you the one that fits, because that didn't make sense. So I'm going to tell you about pine trees in a minute. I thought I could make it work once I got into it, and it just didn't. Both spouses have got to be attentive to the relationship. Knowing that we were going to be moving, about 3 weeks ago I purchased some appliances because the folks that bought our former house, they wanted all of them. 2 refrigerators, a dishwasher, and a microwave is what I wanted to buy. I'd done my research. I knew that I wanted to buy, after looking at reviews and stuff, I wanted to buy a Whirlpool. Beyond that, I knew the sizes, I knew the color, I knew all of that. And so really all I need is a salesman to effectively ring me up. And I've had good experience in the past dealing with locally owned, independently operated appliance stores. And I knew of one in Greensboro, and I thought, that's who I want to do business with. So a few weeks ago, I go over there, and I walk in, I meet a salesman. I said, listen, I need 2 refrigerators, a dishwasher, and a microwave. This is the brand that I want. These are the sizes that will fit, and this is the color that I want. Now, in addition to that, I'm operating under this awareness. I'm not buying a single appliance, I'm buying 4 of them. And generally when that happens, they'll work with you on the price. And I anticipated, quite frankly, out of the gate, he's going to say, hey, relative to price, we'll help you out since you're buying more than one of these things. So I've shared all this information with him. The appliances, the color, size, brand, all of that. So what does he do? Does he show me that color? Nope. Does he show me that brand? We don't look at a single Whirlpool. We look at GE. We look at all these other. We never look at Whirlpool. Does he show me that size? Nope. Relative to price, what does he do? He shows me list price. And so I got all of his information, and I wasn't there very long, and I headed back out to the car, and I got in the car, and I called Caroline. I said, listen, I had every intention of doing business with them, but it seems to me they don't want our business. I know what I want, and if I can't find it there, I'm going to find it somewhere else. Now, that same mentality is also true, I believe, within the confines of marital relationship. You and I are aware individually of needs that we have, whether they be emotional or physical or whatever they are. And if we are not going to find those needs met, those needs just don't go away. Those desires don't simply evaporate. And so what do? What so many times happens? They find those needs being met elsewhere. So what's got to take place? Well, if we're going to be serious about affair-proofing our marriages, we've got to make sure that both spouses are attentive to the relationship. But based on Joseph's experience, there's something else that we've got to do, and that's this. Both spouses must avoid compromising situations. Both spouses must avoid compromising situations. You got to feel sorry for Joseph at this point. He's effectively a trapped man. He's an innocent victim in this story, and we can see very much how he is genuinely between a rock and a hard place. While Joseph is innocent in this, Potiphar's wife is not. She's the aggressor. She's the one seeking to perpetrate and to bring about this adulterous affair. And after the passage of time, her initial attraction to Joseph in her heart and her mind, it begins to grow and swell so that finally she is ready to act on this. And she actively seeks to seduce Joseph. We're told there at the end of verse 7, her desires are unambiguous. She says to lie with me. But we're told in verse 8 that Joseph refused. He said to her, look, my master doesn't know what's with me and all that's in the house. He's committed all that he has to my hand. There's no one greater in this house than I. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And so he's told her no. But then we're told about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work and none of the men was inside. She caught him by his garment, and once again she said, lie with me. Here again is our question. How does this happen? How do we get to a point, how do these circumstances develop and progress to a point where this becomes a possibility? Well, I think quite frankly, again, Joseph is an innocent victim in all of this, but Potiphar's wife is not. How does she get to this point and to this place? Well, because she was intentional about finding and creating alone time with Joseph. Do you think that she said any of these things when Potiphar was around? Do you think while Potiphar was at home, she said, "You're looking good today, Joseph. How about I slip into something more comfortable?" Do you think she said any of that while Potiphar was around? No. Do you think she said, "Lie with me," while Potiphar was at home? No, she didn't. In fact, what we're told in this passage, that when she actively, physically grabs him to lay hands on him, what has she done? She's not only waited until Potiphar's gone, she waits until the house is empty. And then once she's got Joseph all by herself so that no one else is around, so that no one else will see, so that hopefully no one else will know, then she seeks to act. This communicates to us an important lesson. This happened because Potiphar's wife was in a circumstance she should have never been in the first place. As a married woman, she had no business in isolation with a member of the opposite sex, period. Period. What does the Bible tell us about temptation? Particularly, what does it say to us about sexual temptation? Well, among other things, it tells us to flee youthful lusts. It tells us in times of temptation that God will provide a way of escape that we might be able to bear it. It tells us to flee sexual immorality. God is telling us you need to keep your running shoes on. That's exactly what Joseph did. When she lays hands on him, he flees. He saturates, as Adrian Rogers used to say, he saturated that place with his absence. He gets out of there. But how did Potiphar's wife get to that point? Was it because she was avoiding compromising situations? No, it's because she actively even sought them out. She wanted to get alone time with Joseph. In terms of application for us, I believe there's some very clear, direct application for our lives, which is this. Those of you guys who are married, you have no business whatsoever spending alone time with another woman, whether she is married or not. Those of you women who are married, you have absolutely no business in isolation with a man who is not your husband, period. Now you say, well, Michael, that seems to be such a high bar. That seems to be such a tough standard. After all, you can say, well, it's just lunch and they're a coworker. You can say, we're just friends. Nothing would ever come from this. But again, here's the question. How did Potiphar's wife ever get to the point where she did this? Because she was alone with Joseph. If that had never happened, if she had never permitted this type of scenario to unfold, do you think that we would be reading about this in Genesis chapter 39? No, we would not. There would not have been an advance. There would not have been the pursuit of an affair. There would not have been the seeking out to commit adultery. That would not have happened had she done what God expects us to do, which is to be on guard against, to safeguard ourselves, to be intentional about avoiding compromising situations. Just a minute ago, I told you about the pine tree thing, and the point was this. A pine tree that's not there can't fall on my house. A situation between you and a member of the opposite sex where you can violate your marital vows, it will not happen if that scenario is never allowed an opportunity. If you are never alone with a member of the opposite sex, it's pretty tough to commit adultery, isn't it? So what's the application for us? Make sure that doesn't happen. If we're going to effectively, as followers of Christ, affair-proof our marriages, we've got to both be attentive to the relationship, and then we've both got to be intentional about guarding against compromising situations and saying, you know what, I'm going to make every effort and I'm going to ensure that there's never even an opportunity, even if the thought were to come into my mind, there's never even an opportunity for action to actually take place. But there's a final thing that we see based on this passage we need to do if we're going to effectively safeguard our marriages against infidelity. And that is this: both spouses need to have an understanding of the risks. Both spouses need to have an understanding of the risks. Joseph, again, at this point, he's in a lousy situation. He really is. He's innocent in all of this. And he's presented by this approach, by this this aggressor in Potiphar's wife seeking to commit sexual immorality with him. And as I see it, he's really only got one of two options. The first option is to yield to her advances and say, well, okay. And very easily he could have rationalized that and said, well, I know that this is not right, that it's not good, but if I don't do this, well, she's my master's wife. And if I offend her by rebuffing her, she could make life miserable on me. It may be that she puts a bug in Potiphar's ear so that he sells me to another slave master who won't be nearly as gracious. I may be brutally treated, violently treated. Maybe somehow, some way I could even lose more freedom so that I wind up in prison. Maybe he could have said, I'm going to do this because after all, it's just sex. Just this one time we'll get this over with. I'll be done with her, and then we'll go on as if nothing happened. He could have said, hey, I'm going to yield to this because of these or who knows how many other reasons. That was option number one. Thankfully, Joseph doesn't take that option. He does something very different. In fact, as she lays hold of him, what does he do? We're told in verse 12, he fled and he ran outside. She has tried repeatedly. Repeatedly, he says no, he says no, he says no, and finally, he actually leaves. But it's interesting what he says to her as he has, in the early advances, his responses to these advances. He says in verse 8, look, my master doesn't know what is with me in the house. He's committed all that he has to my hand. In fact, he goes on to say, the only individuals and the only thing that is not responsible to me in this home is you and your husband. Everything else in this household, everything on this property has been entrusted to my care because your husband, because Potiphar trusts me. How in the world can I violate that trust by doing this with you? I mean, that's one of the greatest risks of adultery is the absolute violation and the destruction of trust. I remember over the years there have been a few instances where I've had an individual or couples come to me and share with me their experiences in married life as they have had to go through adultery. Either as one that committed the act or one that was a victim of the act. I remember a number of years ago talking with a lady, and her husband had cheated on her with a coworker. And she comes to me and she's sharing this with me and seeking some counsel, and she's just got tears coming down her face, just sobbing. And she says, I'm so heartbroken over this. Inside, I'm just devastated. And she said, consistently, I think there are things about my husband that only I should know, but now I know somebody else does. That shouldn't be the case. And my husband keeps encouraging me that, hey, we can work through this. We need to move beyond this. And what I keep saying to him is that the trust has been absolutely decimated. And where do we go when there's no trust? Trust takes a lifetime to build, but it can evaporate like that, can it? It can go away like a vapor. That's what she was saying to me. The trust is gone. What exactly now do I do? Now, am I here to say to you today that there is no hope and that it's a death knell in a relationship if adultery ever affects a marriage? No, I'm not saying that. I am saying clearly, and I want you to understand, with God's help, all things are possible. I can tell you it will never be the same, but I can say with God's help it can become good again, but it's not going to be easy. Because adultery absolutely violates and completely decimates trust. Joseph tells Potiphar's wife, listen, I can't do this because it violates the trust that Potiphar has placed in me. But then notice he says something else, the other risk that's involved. At the end of verse 9, he says, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Yes, this is a sin against my master, a man that has trusted me implicitly, but beyond all of that, this is something that is viewed by the God of the universe as wickedness. How can I do this and sin against him? I'd be sinning against my supervisor, against my master, but ultimately I'd be sinning against God. How in the world can I do this? We need to understand, after all, marriage is God's idea. He's the one that created it in the first place. It was God's idea how, in His own words, He describes, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." That was God's idea. It was God's idea that a man and woman would come together and their strengths and their weaknesses would be offset by the strengths and the weaknesses of another. It was God's plan that one man and one woman would come together in marriage and share a lifetime together. It would be an unending commitment. That was all God's idea. And what are we doing? When we violate these marital vows through infidelity, we are essentially thumbing our noses at the institution that God Himself has created. Something that was His idea. Something that He, more than any other, supports. Joseph says, how in the world can I do this? Not simply against Potiphar, how in the world can I do this against God? What he's trying to help underscore in her mind are the risks. It decimates the trust of others, and it's a sin against God. If you and I are ever going to ensure and seek to safeguard our marriages against infidelity, we've got to understand and we've got to be aware of the risks. It'll cause you to violate the trust of your spouse. It'll cause you to violate the standards of God and to sin ultimately against Him. Over the years, something like this has happened a number of times in our house. You've probably experienced something like it a time or two before. And that is, let's say we've had some dirty dishes in the dishwasher, and the dishwasher has run. It has finished. And so I may go in there and I'm going to begin the process of emptying the dishwasher and putting the dishes away. And so I start with some cups or go to some bowls, maybe working on the silverware. And maybe it is that the phone rings or something comes up and I can't finish. And so what I'll do is I'll push the trays back in and I'll shut the dishwasher door. And I'll tell myself, hey, I'll come back later and finish that. Well, in the meantime, some other dishes, some dirty dishes have accumulated in the sink. And maybe it's Caroline or maybe one of the kids goes and puts some of these dirty bowls, these dirty cups, these dirty forks into this dishwasher that, unbeknownst to them, has clean dishes in it. So they put them in there. And so at some point later, Caroline comes back in and we begin the process of emptying what we believe to be a clean dishwasher. And as you're starting to put bowls, what's that? Now, the first one, you may get a napkin and just wipe off. Sit that in there. You want to come to our house for lunch? Flower pot cleans all of ours. Anyway, but then you get to another dish, you get to a fork, and you see something else, and you're like, no, somebody's put dirty dishes in here. And at that point, I don't know what's clean, I don't know exactly what's dirty, so what do? I run the dishwasher again. Why? Because I want to make sure that it's all clean. I want to make sure. You know, as you have heard this morning, and you have read along with me what's going on here in Joseph's life, very easily you could say, you know what? As for me and my marriage between my spouse and I, things are just fine. Our relationship is healthy. Our marriage is strong. You know, adultery, I just don't think that's never going to happen to us. Can I just remind you of the words of Scripture which tell us this? Let him who thinks he stand take heed lest he fall. What I'm asking you to do this morning is very simple. I believe, quite frankly, it's what God would want you to do this morning. And that's to do what I did with the dishes in the dishwasher. Make sure. Make sure. If you don't want infidelity to ever affect your relationship, you got to make sure. You got to make sure that you and your spouse are both attentive to the marriage. You've got to both make sure that you avoid at all cost any compromising situation. And you've got to make sure that both of you understand just how high the risks are. It's the violation of the trust of others, and ultimately it's sin and wickedness against God. That's how you affair-proof your marriage. Books up around your desk, that won't stop it. But based on what God says, this will prevent it. The question is, how safe? How secure is your relationship? I want you to bow your heads with me. I don't know how